Thank you for that gorgeous song, for that sentiment of holding each other in love that is church. It is so good to be with all of you. So good to be in the place that, as I said, made me a Unitarian Universalist. I was coming in today and was reminded that the last time I was here was pre-COVID, and it feels like, in so many ways, a whole new world, and yet to be here among those who gather each and every Sunday, not all of us each and every Sunday. We don't think we're going to hell if you miss church one week, but the community each and every Sunday that gathers here because, well, someone else might show up, and you want there to be someone to know that they would be missed if they weren't here. It's a good time to be with all of you, but a difficult time. I'll admit that this week, much to the not quite panic and in fact incredible graciousness of everyone leading worship with me and those who pull together the order of service, I thought, well, gosh, I can't possibly know what I want to preach on. Haven't you seen the headlines? This week felt especially heavy to me in a year that has felt especially heavy. And in so many ways, I don't need to tell you everything that is wrong with the world. You have your phone to tell you that each and every morning. If you haven't yet taken the good advice that is given to me nearly every week, that I should probably get out of bed and throw open the curtains before checking my phone. No, church is the shelter, not the storm. And so I don't need to list all of the challenges, but the truth is, it does feel like a particularly difficult time. A time when church is especially needed. A time when faith community, a circle of people to tell us who we are and what is good in the world and what is worth fighting for, and that no matter what else is happening, we persist, feels especially important. We are making good on the claim that I heard a minister say a few years back when we were debating within Unitarian Universalism about whether or not we should adopt a new articulation of the values that connect our congregations and our people. She said, these values feel like they have been written out of trauma. And she said it as an argument against them. But what immediately struck me at the time was that this is the origin of basically all sacred texts. Haven't you read the Bible? I said to her. It's not our uniform sacred text. Not all Unitarian Universalists draw from it. But those people were really in the muck and the mud. This was their faithful response. Messy, imperfect, but a response all the same to times when faith was truly needed. It's not the only sacred text. This is how the articulation of who and how we are together emerges. Indeed, biblical scholar Walter Brueggemann, in his explanation of the Psalms, basically talks about these sacred songs, these songs sung by ancient people central to both Judaism and Christianity as sort of three strokes. He categorizes them into three different ways of doing faith together. The first one is not to put too much of a value judgment on it because it's an important part of the faith journey, but well, it's not the most perhaps mature response. And there are a lot of Psalms like this. It's things are bad, smite our enemies. This is my prayer basically every day right now. I understand this sentiment. And then there's a whole other group that's sort of like working out attachment issues with God. Things are bad, and why have you abandoned us? That's a good question also. And then there's this third set of Psalms that are things are bad, and there's also beauty and wonder. Right alongside the grief lies gratitude and growth. A people working together through hard things, the emergence of a sacred text through trauma. And as Unitarian Universalists, I believe, and I have experienced week after week after week, that we are a faith that practices faithfully and well the slipping in to places of grief and sorrow in one another's lives. Here at First Universalist, this is the first place that I heard that church is a perfect place to come when you feel like you need to cry. I heard it when my wife explained that each and every week she planned to not cry. And then at some point, often the music, but sometimes the prayer, sometimes just during the welcome, and very occasionally during the sermon, but not often, she'd find herself moved to tears. Something about what was happening directly in the service, but often something that had happened in the week, or something that was going on for her, that this space, this place, these people gave her a chance to sit with. Like a good Unitarian Universalist raised up on Ralph Waldo Emerson, she was pissed about this. Gosh, they got me again, she'd say. But the truth of the matter is, this was a community that knew how to slip into one another's lives, to be in the gap where we needed help but didn't want to admit it, where our own personal lives came apart, were held so we could put ourselves back together. And yet simultaneously, this congregation and the congregations I have been a part of since then, Unitarian Universalism as a whole, and I make broad generalizations here, it doesn't mean all of us, but we're less well practiced at what it means for things to go bad societally all the time. Less in reality and more in aspiration, we are a faith community that is culturally often upper middle class, where people have had lives that are by no means easy, but where the larger social fabric points us as those who could win. I remember having a heated debate with a good friend here in this congregation about what it meant to find themselves suddenly as an elder in this congregation and realizing that the generations coming up behind him no longer expected everything to get better all the time. That the faithfulness of family story that he was raised in is that we would be onward and upward forever as a family, as a person, and as a country. And yet I and others like me were telling a different story. That yes, there had been important civil rights wins in the decades past. Yes, in lots of ways, life had gotten better, but also victory and glory was not inevitable. And still, we were required to learn how to be together. That even with the impossibility of rolling back climate change forever, even with a story of American history that was way more complicated than this person had grown up with, even with all of the hard parts, we showed up at church ready to celebrate, to be joyful, to sing, and to know that it mattered even if we weren't going to win. This felt anathema to my friend, and yet the truth of it lingers for me now as things get worse for all of us. And still we gather to celebrate, to find joy, and to proclaim faith and love together. As a faith community, though we are well practiced into slipping into the shadow places of each other's personal lives, we as a faith community, as a beacon of hope and justice and resistance, must continue to learn despite the grief of the news, despite the lack of inevitable victory. Our faith, our testament, our testimony to a life of love remains ever more important. Our silence, our turning away, our desire to look away from the news and say, no, no, it's too much, will not protect us. If it can happen to a judge in Wisconsin, it can happen to any of us. If it can happen to the mayor of Newark, it can happen to any of us. If the normal, everyday living out of our values in ways that are deemed radical, deemed terrorism, can happen to those with the most protection and power among us, it can happen to any of us. We must learn to use our grief, our heartbreak, as our superpower. It's the coat that love wears, as Kevin the Coyote told us. But as a faith community, we are not without resources, not without songs and stories and the rehearsal of the beloved community. Here on Memorial Day, we find ourselves honoring uncomfortably, because many of us have at best mixed feelings about the glorification of the militarization of our own values. We have Memorial Day, a commemoration of loss, of grief, of harm that ought not continue, and yet clearly does in numbers and egregiousness that feels too heartbreaking to fully hold in our minds today. We have here a place of rehearsal, of practice. As a young Unitarian Universalist, I found myself stuffed into the car of John Arancio and Liz Wolfe. Excuse me, they're not here, so they can't be mad at me. They put me in the backseat of their car and took me to my very first General Assembly, my very first gathering of Unitarian Universalists beyond the confines of these walls. And it was there, sitting in a workshop, that I was first asked the question, for whom does your heart break? For whom does your heart break? First asked the question that this presenter laid out before us as the very foundation of what it means to be a congregation. The claim she made there, and that many others do, is that as a gathering of people, our own heartbreak, our collective mourning, our collective outrage, our collective grief is what allows us to understand our purpose in the world. For whom does your heart break? Therein might your congregation find its mission, its purpose, its reason for being. I had never heard these words or understood that this is what church could be, but stuffed into the backseat of that car, I was called forth to an understanding of who and how we are together that challenges me still each and every day. At another General Assembly, another gathering of Unitarian Universalists beyond these walls, I found myself with today's worship associate, Aaron White, sitting in a hall of thousands of Unitarian Universalists who were, though I simplify this far too much to be fair, essentially debating, do Black Lives Matter? This was many years ago, and again, I simplify the debate too much, but I found it, and Aaron found it, heartbreaking and confusing and difficult to be in this room, full of people we thought shared our values, but whose expression of them in this broader world lacked the clarity that I felt I had. Yes, there may have been a bit of self-righteousness in my own position, but who and how we are together suddenly felt more difficult to hold. Aaron talks about this moment and a journey over time in faith community as a crucible of transformation. That same General Assembly, that confusion, that heartbreak about who we were together, found ourselves also moving from that place. And I and hundreds of others, including Aaron, found ourselves in a bodily protest, holding up traffic, lying on the ground in a way that many there thought would never be possible for themselves, called to a type of protest that felt too scary to imagine even days prior. Unitarian Universalism, our own tremors and heartbreak, our grief, our tears that we drove each other to again and again in debate and question, called forth a courage that others did not know lied within them. Last time you all were in ministerial search, I found myself, and this is my last story for the day, but last time you were in search, I found myself on the search team with Jim Saslow and others who may be here today or joining us online. And repeatedly, I joked with ministers about our building, our community, and in particular, what lied behind this curtain. It's a mural of Jesus, I'd tell them, and I'd say, well, basically, you can talk about Jesus in your sermon as long as the curtains are closed. And if the curtains are open, you can't. I was joking, but I think not really. And the curtains are closed now, so I'm going to tell you an ancient story. A group of friends were heartbroken. Their friend John had been killed by police. John, well, he was a Baptist, that is to say, someone who baptized, who submerged others in water, and this was seen as terrorism. It wasn't considered that, and then it was, and so the police killed John, and his friends were heartbroken and mourning and grieving. They didn't know what to do, and they were tired, and they thought, probably they wanted to go home to the different homes from which they had gathered, not knowing what to do. It had all been fun and games when they were getting gathered up and being dunked in water and having feasts, but it wasn't fun anymore. And their other friend, Jesus, said, no, we're not going home. People are gathering by the hundreds, by the thousands. They're coming, and they don't really know why yet. I don't really know why, and neither do you, but when people gather, we feed them. And you can imagine the friends hungry and tired and grieving, wanting to turn away, not toward one another, not toward the strangers. Too much heartbreak. And Jesus says no. And they get together and they take stock of what they have. And some of you might know this story. They've got 5 loaves and 2, anybody know? Yeah, they got 2 fish. 12 friends plus Jesus, and hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands gathering. 5 loaves and 2 fishes does not seem like quite enough. And they are tired and heartbroken. But Jesus says, no, we're going to do this. We're going to feed people because that's what you do. Haven't you ever been to a funeral? You mourn and you eat together. You gather and you turn toward one another. And at this point, the various accounts of the story, they all go a couple of different ways. And nobody really knows what happened, of course. Nobody really knows if this happened. But the 12 tired and heartbroken friends and their 5 loaves and their 2 fishes and Jesus find that life and the fish unfold just like that sponge that the woman carried into the tears of experience at her feet. And the people gather and they are brought together in small groups on that hillside, told what we had and told what the problem was, that people needed to eat. that there was a feast to come, and yet we didn't quite know where that was going to come from yet. You can imagine, you gather in small groups, small group ministry or community organizing, and you can imagine being handed a problem like this. But you've come on a long journey to this hillside. You've packed some provisions also. And so you sit around in groups and you hear that people need to be fed, that you need to be fed. And you've got a little bit of bread in your bag. You've got some dried fish, some vegetables, some wine. The groups of people gathered and the heartbroken friends who came because they knew someone else might show up, even though they didn't feel like they had enough to give, that they didn't know that they had enough within them to want to gather. And looking around saying, what have you got? We've got a problem to solve together. Suddenly those 5 loaves and those 2 fishes, well, suddenly there was enough to feed everyone. People gathering, turning towards one another and asking, what do you have and what do you need? How does your heartbreak interlock with mine? And what might we do together? Some might call that a miracle. Lots of people have. And my Unitarian Universalist faith teaches me that the stories and songs and places of hope and loss and uncertainty are for us the power, the glory, the hope, and the faithfulness of what it means to be a church community. Because if it can happen to 4 or 12 or tens of thousands of dusty, hungry people out there on a hill somewhere, it can happen to us. If it can happen to those who found themselves angry and grieving and begging God to smite their enemies, it can happen to us. May we come through times of struggle and times of hopelessness with a faith that tells us that our loss, our grief, and our heartbreak is the very foundation of our power. Here in this time, it is so good to be together. Amen, and may it be so.